Tao and you're watching The World Report on NewsX World. Trump has said that Venezuela will turn over 50 million barrels of oil. U.S. crude futures fell 1.3% to 56.39 per barrel after the announcement. White House says U.S. discusses range of options to acquire Greenland, including use of military. Trump says that he has a good relationship with Indian Prime Minister Modi, but he highlighted Modi's displeasure over 50% U.S. tariffs on Indian linked to Russian oil purchases. He has warned that tariffs could rise further if India does not address Washington's concerns. China says U.S. actions dealt blow to Venezuela's economic and social order, threatened stability of global production industry chain. Reports suggest that the deceased Hindu journalist Rana Pratap Bairagi, who was shot dead in Bangladesh, had been paying protection money for months. A Saudi-led coalition says that it had undertaken limited preemptive strikes in Yemen to stop UAE-backed secessionists from escalating the conflict. China is reviewing Meta's $2 billion purchase of AI firm Menace over a possible technology export control issues, a move that could give Beijing leverage over the deal. NVIDIA's CEO confirms that China won't make any formal announcement about approving imports of NVIDIA's H200 chips. Now for this hour, we start with Ukrainian President. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has announced that Ukraine and US teams will meet on 7th January to discuss the most difficult issues in the peace framework. Among the topics on the table are the status of the Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant and territorial disputes that have persisted since the start of the war. Zelensky said Ukraine is ready to tackle these issues, but emphasized that peace must be dignified and that Ukraine relies on its partners to ensure Russia's willingness to end the conflict. Meanwhile, in Cyprus, Zelensky meets with President Nikos Christodoulides as Cyprus takes over the EU Council presidency. His visit follows high-level talks in France with European leaders, including British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and French President Emmanuel Macron. During these talks, a multinational force agreement was signed to support Ukraine's reconstruction and security. This comes as, on the ground, a fire at an oil depot in Russia's Belgorod region has been extinguished after an overnight Ukrainian drone attack, according to reports. The attack targeted multiple oil storage tanks located just 70 kilometers from Ukraine's border. Governor of Belgorod has reported no casualties so far. On the other hand, 7 people, including 2 children, were wounded in a Russian strike on Ukraine's Dnipro region, causing multiple fires and damage to homes and infrastructure. Now we welcome Professor Veselin Popovsky. He's a professor and vice dean at Jindal Global Law School, joins us live from Bulgaria. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us once again. Good to see you. Now, how do you think, what are the sticking points that that would be discussed tomorrow in priority, and does it include Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant and contested territories? How do you think that would be shaping the prospects of, in Zelensky's words, dignified peace for Ukraine?
Yes, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant is a sticking point, and the history here is that it was occupied by Russian army in the first weeks of the war in March 2022. So almost for 4 years, that plant has been in the hands of the Russian army, but it doesn't operate. It was closed, no energy, no electricity. It's a war zone, and basically the plant has been out of operation for 4 years. And interestingly, that's the case everywhere where the Russian army went. All over those 80% of the Donbas area, in misery. There is no operation whatsoever. So what Zelensky wants to kind of send the signal here is that we have the engineers, we have the know-how, the technology. We can start immediately producing energy, electricity out of the Zaporozhye nuclear plant if the Russian army decides to withdraw from it. Because Russians don't have the knowledge, they don't have the engineers to operate that plant. So it's very clear here. The Russian army as occupiers do nothing in those territories they occupy. Let's take the capital, Donetsk of Donbass. It was one of the best cities in not only Ukraine, but even the entire Europe. It has the best stadium, it has the best airport in Ukraine, but also one of the best in Europe. Beyoncé, Rihanna, all those celebrities visited Donetsk to make performances in that stadium in front of 100,000 people. The city is loved. It was announced as the best investment opportunity for the entire former Soviet Union by Moscow. That's ironic. Moscow recognized Donetsk as one of the best cities in the former Soviet Union in 2012 and in 2013. What happened in 2014, the next year, Russia occupied Donbass with its separatists, and today, 11 years later, Donetsk is the most miserable city in Europe, with no electricity, no water, half of the house is destroyed, a third of the population evacuated. This is what happened when the Russian army occupies any land of Ukraine. From the best places, it becomes the worst places. They become miserable and people suffer there. The same with Zaporozhye nuclear plant. It is out of operation, billions of money lost because Russians cannot operate the nuclear plant. So very clearly,
Yes.
those negotiations tomorrow are very important. Zelensky will tell the US team that he's very happy to diplomacy, to discussing every other sticking point. He offered already to withdraw for 20 or 40 kilometers from the battle line if Russians do the same, to create economic zone between the two armies. So they withdraw, and this 40 or 80 kilometer neutral demilitarized zone becomes monitored by the US or by the United Nations Air
Yes.
Force or intelligence to
Professor-
somehow make the peace possible.
Professor, what strategic significance does the proposed multinational force, discussed yesterday, hold for Ukraine's security and post-war reconstruction?
Yes, that's a very constructive proposal to have a multinational force, not Europeans only, not NATO, but definitely it's also another kind of compromise Ukraine is making. Let those be United Nations force, and part of those could be Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Chinese, whoever wants to volunteer forces for patrolling the line of detachment, the demilitarized zone is most welcome to do that. That's an excellent proposal. It should be a multinational forum, ideally under the umbrella of the United Nations. And those forces report to the United Nations, for example, and say there are some violations, one side or another side. I think this is exactly what happened in all other conflicts in the past. If we go back to the conflicts after the Second World War, every time there was in the Middle East, between India and Pakistan, in Cyprus and everywhere else, there is United Nations blue helmets, the United Nations peacekeepers, that are patrolling and monitoring the zone of former combat so that they ensure and guarantee that the hostilities do not start again.
Right. Thank you, Professor Veselin Popovsky, for sharing that. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, moving the focus on to Middle East, in Syria, the army has announced that Aleppo's Kurdish neighborhoods of Sheikh Maqsud and Ashrafiyeh will become closed military zones starting on Wednesday at 3 p.m. local time. Authorities said 2 humanitarian corridors would be established to allow civilians to leave safely before military operations begin. Sporadic clashes continued between Syrian government forces and Kurdish fighters following 2 days of intense fighting that has killed at least 9 people. The situation remains tense as regional authorities try to balance military objectives with civilian safety. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Professor Veselin Popovsky. He's a professor and vice dean of Jindal Global Law School, joins us live from Bulgaria. Thank you very much, Professor, for staying with us. Now looking at this, how has this Syria, Yemen, and also Saudi Arabia, how are all of them intertwined in this region?
Yes, unfortunately, yes, as you mentioned, there were clashes between the governmental forces and what we call Syrian Democratic Forces, the Kurdish army, which still occupies large part of Syria. And these are basically places where Kurdish population live. Kurdish is the biggest minority in the world without state. It's a stateless people, but altogether they're about 40 to 45 million people, and they live in several countries, Syria, Iraq, Turkey. And in Syria, those clashes you mentioned over the last 2 days are very unfortunate. Exchange of fire. Both sides blame the other side for those clashes. And ideally, they should be integrated at one point into the Syrian army. But that process needs to still take some time for building confidence and trust between the two sides. And it may take some time, but I hope that will be, again, both sides show, by the way, quite a good cooperation for that. Yes, there were some civilians who died, but immediately after that, both sides cooperated as to stop the fire and to withdraw and to negotiate what the future of those Kurdish-led forces will be. Ideally, they should disarm and reintegrate with the Syrian army. The United States is supporting Kurdish, so they got a lot of advice and even military equipment from the United States, which is Syrian government and Turkish government specifically do not like that. Turkey still pronounced the Kurdish as a terrorist organization, which is entirely obsolete and anachronistic already, that definition. So Turkey needs also to get cooperative into the situation in the Kurdish part of Syria. And yes, you also mentioned Yemen, Saudi Arabia. There are still a lot of issues to be resolved in Yemen. Here the fight is between the governmental forces, which are supported by Saudi Arabia, and the rebels, Houthis and others, that are supported by Iran. So yes, Yemen continues to be a geography which is utilized for kind of proxy war, both times Saudi Arabia and Iran. Again, hopefully in 2026 there will be negotiations as how to de-escalate the conflict in Yemen with mostly pressure from Iran to stop supporting the Houthis and other rebel groups against the legitimate government of Yemen. So on this, Saudi Arabia is supporting the legitimate government of Yemen. So such clashes will probably occur again, but there is also quite willingness to cooperate and to de-escalate and to resolve those remaining conflicts, both in Syria and in Yemen.
Yes, right. Thank you very much. With that, I would like to thank Professor Veselin Popovsky for joining us and sharing that insight throughout our news. Thank you very much. Now we move the focus on to Asia. South Korean President Myung has concluded his 4-day visit to China with a press briefing in Shanghai. He has discussed the progress made in restoring trust with Beijing, particularly on North Korea's nuclear program. He has called on China to mediate in efforts to restart dialogue with Pyongyang. The South Korean president has also addressed the complexities of relations with both China and Japan. Stressing that the importance of national interests, Li and Chinese President Xi Jinping held multiple meetings during the visit, focusing on peace on the Korean Peninsula and strategic cooperation between the two countries. Let's listen in to what the President of South Korea has shared.
이번 방중은 생각보다 더 많은 진전들이 있었던 것 같습니다. 교감도 많이 이루어졌던 것 같고 또 여러 예를 들면 대립할 수 있는 사안들에 대해서도 아주 원만하게 해소할 수 있는 길을 찾아냈던 것 같습니다. 중국이 중재자 역할을 평화의 중재자 역할을 좀 해주면 좋겠다 이렇게 얘기했습니다. 시 주석께서는 지금까지 노력을 평가하고 인내심을 가질 필요가 있다 이런 얘기를 지금 문제된 수출 통제 문제는 매우 복합적이고 뿌리가 깊죠. 그래서 그냥 하나의 현상처럼 보이지만 그 현상만으로는 설명할 수 없는 매우 복잡한 문제입니다. 일단은 원만하게 신속하게 잘 일본과의 관계도 또 중국과의 관계만큼 중요하죠. 그리고 제가 이 얘기도 명확하게 했습니다. 중국의 시진핑 주석은 중국의 국가적 이익을 위해서 최선을 다하고 대한민국 대통령 이재명은 대한민국 국익을 위해서 최선을 다합니다.
Now for this discussion, we welcome Dr. Satoru Nagao. He's a fellow at Hudson Institute, joins us live from Tokyo. Thank you very much, Dr. Satoru, for joining us once again. Good to see you. Now, looking at this, first I would like to focus on China, Japan, and South Korea. Where does South Korea strategically lie, or where do they stand when it comes to China and Japan's current, situation, and also regarding Taiwan?
Yes, in case of the South Korea, the former President Myung was the rare president. He expressed the concern that change the status quo by force in Taiwan Strait when he was the president. But after that, now under the President Lee, South Korea tried to return to the traditional stance of the South Korea, which is simply South Korea tried to take distance from the Taiwan Strait issue. But in case of China, because of China is preparing to annex Taiwan by force, so China recently asked South Korea to be the China side. So South Korea need to manage this situation. The South Korea's card is, instead of the conceding some, the South Korea want to ask China to cooperate with South Korea to deal with North Korea. Because South Korea thinks China has a strong influence to the North Korea, and North Korea's provocation could be restrained by China. So that's why the South Korea side asked China to restrain North Korea is South Korea's demand, and especially if possible, South Korea wants China to end the nuclear development program of North Korea. So that's why the two countries try to deal with this situation. But it is true that South Korea faced China, Russia, North Korea alliances. So South Korea need to cooperate with the US and Japan. And in case of China, China really planning to invade Taiwan. Because of this US, Japan, South Korea alliance itself is a threat for this operation against Taiwan. So that's why anyway, even if the both sides demand each other, indeed how to reply that there is a huge space they can concede. So that's why even if on surface they show the big smile in the picture, indeed they cannot concede so much and they cannot agree so much. That is the situation they faced just now, I think.
Right. And now moving the focus to North Korea and South Korea, why is South Korea, not hinting but relying not heavily, but kind of a little bit towards China on their relationship, their strained relationship between South Korea and North Korea?
Because South Korea faces North Korea's threat, and North Korea is really developing their weapons very drastic pace recently because of the Russia's support and also the China's support. In case of the Russia's support, North Korea's development of the missiles or the nuclear submarines, these develop very fast pace. Now North Korea has a hypersonic missile which South Korea's defense system cannot intercept and destroy it. So under such kind of situation, the South Korea face a big threat. And recently North Korea also allied with Russia. So that's why if the South Korea try to deal with North Korea, it could be the South Korea versus Russia war. So South Korea faces the alliance of the North Korea, Russia, China, all of three at the same time. In this case, South Korea needs the US and Japan. So that's why indeed the space South Korea can deal with as a diplomacy is very limited. Anyway, South Korea cannot concede too much to China. So that's why South Korea's diplomacy is just show the smile, but cannot concede so much.
Thank you for highlighting that, Dr. Nagao. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, moving the focus to states, the Trump administration has announced that it is freezing more than $10 billion in federal child care and family assistance funds to California, Colorado, Illinois, Minnesota, and New York, citing concerns about fraud and misuse. The freeze affects the Child Care and Development Fund Temporary Assistance for Needy Families and the Social Services Block Grant. Democrats have strongly condemned the move, calling it cruel and vindictive. New York Governor Kathy Hochul and Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker said children should not be political pawns. Minnesota has been specifically targeted over alleged fraud in immigrant communities, including the Somali population rights groups that warn the administration is using fraud investigations to attack immigrants and political opponents. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Dr. Satoru Nagao. Dr. Satoru Nagao, thank you very much for staying with us. Now looking at this, why is Trump specifically targeting these 5 places that I've mentioned, and also how will this further affect his upcoming and midterm elections? What do you think?
I think there is a real fraud incident that happened in Minnesota is true, but at the same time, this scandal could be useful, exploitable in the battle of the midterm election. Because if the Democrat leads state government cannot deal with the life in their states, in this case, people complain a lot and they want to change the government, and it will affect the midterm election. So that's why the fraud case is there, that is true. And but this scandal is exploitable for the midterm election to get the Democrat state to become the Republican state. So that's why the midterm election affects this fraud case in Minnesota, and it will spread to the other Democrat-led 4 states. So in total 5 states, temporarily the budget has suspended. But because the Republicans want to win the election in the midterm election, That's why just stop the fund and the damage is not a purpose. Purpose is winning the election. So that's why the Republican side checks the situation carefully. And after the suspended this budget, how to rise their popularity is maybe they are preparing just now, I think.
With that, I would like to thank Dr. Satoru Nagao for joining us today from Tokyo and sharing that insight throughout our news. Thank you very much. Now we move on to our tech news. CES 2026 is underway in Las Vegas, bringing together industry and government leaders, investors, and media from and around the world. The event features over 4,100 exhibitors showcasing innovations in AI, digital health, robotics, mobility, energy, immersive entertainment, and more. Hosted by the Consumer Technology Association, CES will be running across multiple Las Vegas venues, including the newly renovated Las Vegas Convention Center. This marks the first time the $600 million upgraded LVCC Legacy Campus is hosting this event. Speaking at the event, the founders and innovators behind these breakthrough technologies shared their thoughts and the challenges they face. Let's listen in.
So this is the beadbot aquatic robot turtle, aka Tortini. So Tortini is designed not to clean pools, it's designed to study marine life. It's a research robot. So it looks like a turtle, moves like a turtle, but it is packed with many sensors, cameras, so it could be deployed in the ocean to study different types of coral, of plants, of marine life, and even quality of water.
95% of soft plastic is unrecycled globally. The nature of it makes it very difficult to fit into the recycling process because it takes up a lot of volume and it weighs almost nothing. So currently it's mostly just disposed of in landfills. It is one of the biggest culprits for plastic pollution in the world.
First, we sense in the environment. There's temperature, light, humidity, pressure sensor, and this is soil moisture sensor and temperature sensor in it. So you can feel what the plant is feeling. And then behind it, there's a real AI model that describes how those parameters are interacting with each other and affecting the plant's growth condition. And then we translate that data into an expressive emoji that you can play with.
Now we move on to our next news. Hundreds have gathered in Saint-Tropez on Wednesday for the funeral of French cinema icon Brigitte Bardot, who died last month at the age of 91 from cancer. Bardot's coffin, adorned with orange and yellow flowers, was carried into the Notre-Dame de l'Assomption Church, where the family members and political figures, including far-right leader Marine Le Pen, attended the service. Inside the church, a black and white photo of Bardot hugging a baby seal was displayed, while supporters outside held placards honoring her animal rights work. Bardot rose to fame in the 1950s with films such as And God Created Women, becoming an international symbol of liberated femininity and later dedicating her life to animal welfare. After the ceremony, Bardot will be buried privately in Saint-Tropez, with a public tribute planned later for locals and fans in the historic town center. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.